In today's video, we are going to cover the Winchester Short Magnums. We're going to look at all of them. We're going to find out why a lot of them have a cult-like following, perform extremely well for their size, and why most of them are dead cartridges. Hope you enjoy the video. Let's take a quick look at the WSM family. First, we have the 300 Winchester Magnum, which is in front of me. Then we have the 270 Winchester Short Magnum. There's also a 7mm Short Magnum. And lastly, a 325 WSM. Let's first take a look at the original Short Magnum. The 300 Winchester Short Magnum came out in 2001. Now, what Winchester really wanted to do was provide a 30 caliber Magnum in a short action in a lighter rifle that basically matches 300 Win Mag performance. And that is basically what they've done. And really, Winchester's way ahead of its time. I know everyone is all about the craze with the PRCs about how they're efficient, extremely well designed. Well, back in the early 2000s, Winchester really started that. And honestly, I'm not sure there's a more efficient 30 caliber Magnum than the 300 WSM. Here is the 300 Winchester Magnum next to the 300 WSM. And at a glance, you might think the 300 Win Mag would smoke a 300 WSM. Now, of course, the 300 WSM case is much wider, but the 300 Win Mag still has more powder capacity. But the 300 WSM matches, at least up to about a 200 grain bullet, matches the performance of the 300 Win Mag. So with a 180 grain, a 300 WSM, you're looking at 3100. Last week, I shot 69.5 grains and got 3137 feet per second with Superformance, so it is definitely obtainable. Then a 200 grain, you're looking at 2950, which again matches the 300 Win Mag. Now, once we get into the bigger bullets, the one downside to this WSM is how the bullets really eke into the powder capacity. So eventually you are going to lose out on velocity over like a 300 Win Mag. So a 212 at 2800, it's not going to be a huge difference from a 300 Win Mag. My dad's personal 300 Win Mag is shooting a 210, 2850 to 2900 feet per second. On average, you're going to be burning 5 to 8 grains less of powder in the 300 WSM than a 300 Win Mag. And again, with the lighter bullets, you're going to match 300 Winchester Magnum performance. Now, another awesome design feature of this WSM is when you design a case that is shorter and wider, you're going to get a more consistent burn rate than the taller Magnums, which in turn basically improves your possibility of precision. So you're going to get better SDs, you're going to get better accuracy, especially downrange. Now, the world record for tightest 10-shot group at 1,000 yards is with this truly, the 300 WSM with a 220 grain burger. In 2001, Winchester also introduced the 7mm WSM. And for whatever reason, this one is probably the most dead of all of the WSM cartridges. So why did the 7 WSM fail while the 300 WSM has been relatively successful? You know, I'm not sure. There is a bunch of theories. One of them is the 7 WSM neck is shorter. So this distance here is shorter than the 300. So there's not as much surface, but that really hasn't stopped the 300 Winchester Magnum from succeeding. The other one that's more likely is the lawsuit that Rick Jameson did on Winchester. Rick basically came up with these designs and Winchester basically stole it and he sued them. He did win and he basically gets royalties for any time a Winchester Short Magnum is sold. So that is, I think, a big reason why these WSM cartridges have never really been hugely successful. It's kind of sad though. The 7 WSM is really a modern and arguably a better version of the 7 Rem Mag. Let's look at the performance of the 7 WSM. 154 grain at 3100, 162 at 3100, and a 175 at 2900. So according to the Hornady data, it matches the 7 Rem Mag. Again, you're going to be burning maybe a little bit less powder than the Rem Mag. I don't know, they're probably about the same though. You don't have to deal with the belt. And again, that modern design where it's a short, fat case, you are going to have much more potential and easier getting good accuracy out of a WSM cartridge. I've gotten a lot of requests to talk about the 325 WSM. And again, I think the lawsuit really hurt it. But in all reality though, I think the biggest issue is that it's in 8mm. When you think of popular big game cartridges, 8mm just never comes to mind, unfortunately. I think 8mm is a good caliber. And obviously it's a bit more popular over in Europe. I don't know, it just never caught on. What's great about the 325 WSM is, well, it's a lot like its other siblings where it's very efficient. It's hitting well above its weight. You're almost basically matching 8mm Remington Magnum performance in this much shorter case. Let's look at the performance. Let's see, a 195 grain at 2850, a 170 grain, kind of an odd bullet weight at 3,000 feet per second. A 150 grain at 3,200. Again, I think the biggest issue with the 325 WSM is that it's an 8mm and not so much that it's a WSM cartridge. There's just hardly any bullet options for 325 WSM. Logically speaking, why get a 325 WSM when you can get a 300 WSM that matches, basically gets the exact same performance, and you got so many more bullet choices and brass on all of that. Now, there is the argument that you've got a much bigger diameter bullet, which will create a bigger wound channel, which is valid, but yeah, in the words of the Vortex guys, this is definitely a lead balloon. In 2002, Winchester introduced their 270 version of the WSM, and funny enough, it has been relatively successful. It has its niche market, it has its fans. It's a darn good cartridge. The 270 WSM is basically giving you 200 to 300 feet per second more performance than the classic 270 Winchester. Now I switched to the Nosler book because for whatever reason the Hornady book really undersells the 270 WSM. So a 130 grain, you're looking at well over 33, almost 3,400 feet per second, which is really impressive. Even your typical 270 Winchester, you're looking at 3,100 to 3,150. A 140 grain at mid 3,200. A 150 grain at almost 3,200. And then a 160 grain at 3,100. I gotta give props where props are due for Winchester. The 270 WSM, as I said, has been relatively successful in a caliber that not many cartridges succeed in. Well, let's just say the 270 Winchester is really the only popular 270. You've had other cartridges like the 270 Weatherby, which is pretty darn niche. You also have the new 27 Nosler, which has been kind of a disaster for Nosler. Not a disaster, but it's a dead cartridge, unfortunately. It's a really good one, but very dead. You also have the 6.8 Western, which is, I think, getting revitalized by the fans. So I hope there is potential with the 6.8 Western to succeed, which I hope it does. But the 270 WSM, I feel like, has gotten a resurgence of late, and it's just darn good. So how would I rate the WSM family cartridges? Let's go from worst to best. I'm not going to go off of popularity, but I'm solely going off of performance, bullet selection, and the caliber. Coming in at dead last, no surprise. I'm sorry for the small fans out there, but the 325 WSM, I think, really is probably the worst WSM cartridge. Basically because when you have the 300 WSM that does everything the 325 WSM does, cheaper and with a lot more availability, I just don't see the real need for a 325 WSM. Coming in at third is the 270 WSM. You might be surprised why I said this one at third. I think what really holds it back is its twist rate and the versatility in bullet weights. So because of that twist rate, at least at sea level, you're going to only be able to shoot up to like a 150 grain bullet. So you're kind of limited. Now, the 6.8 Western is the solution. So Yeah, I don't know. The 270 WSM, darn good, but it's just limited by that twist rate. Coming in at number 2 is the 7mm WSM. Now, this one's basically dead, but performance-wise, you are getting the same performance as the Rem Mag, maybe even a little better, without a belt and a much better case design. I think there's much higher potential for accuracy, but the problem with the WSM is availability. You're just not going to find a rifle or brass or any of that. Coming in at number 1, it's no surprise, we have the 300 WSM. The 300 WSM lives up to all of the hype. It does match 300 Winchester Magnum. It is extremely accurate that I have found. It's just darn efficient. It's hard not to crown this one as the best WSM because it's so versatile. There's more brass available than any other WSM. It's pretty darn good.